After Desmond II's public show of favor, the nobles converged on Eve without hesitation. Compliments, questions, and calculated curiosity closed in from every direction until the attention became suffocating. It took considerable effort and time before she was finally able to extricate herself. Michael immediately guided her away from the crowd, leading her toward the far edge of the banquet hall. Noticing the strain in her steps, he suggested that she rest. Eve agreed and proposed the pearl shell room, a discreet space hidden within the ballroom. Though officially described as a resting chamber, it was widely understood to be a place that invited rumor, an imperially sanctioned refuge for private encounters. Eve entered alone, sinking into the shell-shaped velvet couch nestled deep within the wall. The space was dim, lit by a small chandelier that cast a soft, twilight glow. When Michael commented on the unnatural silence, Eve explained the soundproof barrier embedded in the hallway, common palace magic meant to protect privacy. She teased him lightly for overlooking it, noting that his strengths lay in attack magic, not barriers. The conversation drifted to magic and roles. Eve spoke candidly of her lack of talent in offensive spells, and Michael responded with simple certainty, telling her that she would not need to fight as long as he stood as her sword. The promise was formal, born of imprint and duty, yet it eased something tight in Eve's chest. When Eve briefly asked about Rosenet, Michael's assessment was detached and unemotional, as though beauty alone had left no impression on him. The memory of him wiping his lips after kissing Rosenet's hand surfaced in Eve's mind, and she barely suppressed a smile. Applause rolled through the hall, signaling the banquet's final ceremony. Eve straightened and asked Michael to bring her the person she truly needed to see. He understood immediately and withdrew. Left alone, Eve recalled a figure she had observed earlier, Count Anais Lysiard. Unlike the other young nobles, Anais had not blended into the celebration. She lingered on the edges of the hall, anxiety etched into her expression as empty wine glasses piled beside her. Anais was the sole heir of House Lysiard, a family entrusted with an imperial public works project at the urging of the third princess, Bridget. The business, public bathhouses for the capital, had begun as an honorable duty. Instead, it had become a financial trap. The soaring cost of magic crystals made operation impossible, and attempts to seek guidance or relief were met with silence. Bridget avoided her. The emperor was unreachable. Failure would mean not only ruin, but the loss of title and land. Driven by desperation, Anais reached for another drink, only for a glass of ice water to be placed in front of her. Startled, she looked up to find a black-haired knight wearing an eye patch. He introduced himself with calm precision, informing her that the seventh princess wished to see her. In that moment, as the noise of the banquet swelled around her, Anais realized that a new path, one she had not dared to imagine, was opening before her. Anais hesitated when the knight stopped her. Leaving the banquet now felt reckless, another gamble in a night already heavy with quiet humiliation. She nearly refused, doubt tightening her throat, until Michael spoke with calm certainty. "Tell Her Highness that she will never waste Count Lysiard's time." She did not. Those words struck deeper than courtesy. They sounded like rescue. Anais agreed. Michael escorted her out of the brilliant chaos of the banquet hall and into a dark, double corridor lined with pearl chambers. The silence, the velvet curtains, the discreet bell, everything about the path suggested secrecy. He stopped before a red curtain marked in use and stepped back. "Enter safely. I'll wait here." Alone, Anais steadied herself, rang the bell, and stepped inside. Princess Eve greeted her from the shell-shaped couch with an effortless smile. Despite the rumors of a neglected princess suddenly reborn into grace, the reality was more striking. Eve's posture was composed, her presence serene, her authority unmistakable. Anais could not imagine why she had been summoned. Eve did not let the uncertainty linger. She spoke plainly, revealing that she already knew of House Lysiard's crisis, the imperial bathhouse project, the crushing costs, the silence from the third princess. Hope flared where Anais had not expected it. Misunderstanding Eve's intent, Anais assumed this was a chance to plead her case before Bridget. Eve corrected her gently, then asked the question that mattered. "What would you ask for if you met her?" Anais answered honestly, permission to use fire instead of magic crystals. It was the only solution she could see. Eve's expression softened, almost with pity, as she revealed the truth. Bridget was moving in the opposite direction, tightening fire regulations while fully aware of the crystal shortage. Piece by piece, Eve dismantled the illusion Anais had clung to, Bridget had known. The mining slowdown. The rising prices. The inevitable failure of the bathhouses. Luciard had been chosen not for trust, but for sacrifice, ruined to clear the way for Chancellor Chansley to seize future reconstruction projects at a discount. When Anais finally understood, the betrayal was total. Anger gave way to shame. Her hands trembled. Tears welled. She blamed herself for believing too long. Eve stopped her. It's not your fault. Do not blame yourself. When Anais could not calm herself, Eve reached out, steadying her hands with gentle stabilization magic. Warmth replaced panic. Resolve returned to Anais's eyes, the resolve of a true countess. She remembered Eve's promise. Eve then offered not sympathy, but a solution. If Anais could cover the initial investment, Eve knew a way to supply hot water cheaply, without magic crystals. She explained it simply: reclaim excess heat from bakeries that ran their ovens all day, redirect it through pipes, and turn waste into resource. The idea was shockingly obvious. And revolutionary. Anais stared at the glowing diagram Eve drew in the air, realization crashing over her. What had once been impossible was suddenly clear. As the explanation ended, Eve added one final, quiet wish, that one day, magic crystals would no longer be so cheap that no one bothered to think beyond them. In that room, behind velvet curtains and imperial silence, a ruined house found a future, and a forgotten princess began repaying a debt from a past life. Eve spoke carefully about value, about how people spoke of lowering the price of magic stones as though they were freely given. In truth, they were paid for with invisible sacrifices. The words carried an unspoken weight, one Anais instinctively understood: the homunculi laboring in the mines, condemned and forgotten. Eve realized too late that she had revealed too much of her inner thoughts and gently steered the conversation elsewhere. She returned to practicality. Beyond bakeries, pottery kilns could also be used to reclaim heat, especially in District 17, where studios clustered near Artisan Street. The bathhouse project could thrive there. Anais immediately grasped the value of the idea. Eve erased the glowing diagram in the air and asked if it had been helpful. Anais's gratitude was sincere. Eve smiled, not out of etiquette, but relief. In her previous life, House Luciard had been destroyed exactly here. Bridget's scheme had bankrupted them, handing their business to Marquis Chansley. Bath culture later flourished under his name alone, funded by political favoritism and dangerous negligence. A catastrophic fire followed, killing hundreds. No one was held accountable. Luciard's ruin and death had been meaningless. This time, Eve refused to let history repeat itself. When Anais offered sponsorship in return, Eve declined. Instead, she proposed partnership. She spoke of baths not merely as hygiene, but as a cultural force and of the business that would inevitably follow: soap. She explained the failure of current soaps and proposed producing high-quality alternatives using her own researched formula. In her past life, this had been a quiet passion that became a success. Anais sensed it too and agreed, envisioning growth beyond soap alone. Then Eve's tone shifted. She warned of another industry that would emerge alongside public baths: prostitution. In her past life, it had grown in the shadows, enriching Bridget and Chansley while turning entire districts into centers of crime, trafficking, and exploitation. Anais, shaken, declared firmly that House Luciard would never engage in such business. Eve accepted the answer with visible relief. That was the partner she wanted. Trust solidified between them. As the meeting drew to a close, Eve instructed Anais to maintain appearances. There were too many eyes in the palace. Instead, Eve would send a handmaiden to Luciard Street, disguised as a delivery of yellow Rudbeckia. Anais agreed, even though it meant remaining in a hostile ballroom longer than she wished. After Anais left, Eve finally allowed herself to rest, sinking into the velvet couch. She closed her eyes, calling softly for Michael. There was no response. Anais stirred. Eve drew back the curtain. And Michael, who should have been waiting just outside, was gone. While Eve held her secret meeting with Anais inside the Pearl Room, Michael waited just outside. His posture was immaculate, unmoving, so flawless that he could have been mistaken for a statue carved from devotion itself. Had nothing interfered, he would have remained there without complaint, faithfully carrying out his duty as Eve's immediate knight. But something did interfere. Rosenet, the 8th princess, appeared alone in the dim hallway, an unnatural place for someone meant to shine in the brightest spaces. The moment Michael noticed her, suspicion settled in his chest. From their very first meeting, he had felt it, an instinctive displeasure he could not name. She approached him with a gentle smile and asked whether Eve was inside. Michael answered curtly, noting that Eve was resting alone. Rosnit's questions grew more intrusive, subtly questioning why he was not accompanying his princess. To Michael, her innocent tone only sharpened his irritation. Then she suggested it. She ordered Michael to escort her on her walk in the garden. Michael could not refuse a request from the imperial family. With Eve occupied and no lawful reason to deny her, he accepted. The instant his fingertips touched Rosnit's hand, a wave of revulsion surged through him. He clenched his other fist to hide it. The discomfort was visceral, far worse than the unease he had felt when swearing allegiance to the emperor himself. As they walked through the moonlit garden, Michael endured each step like a trial. Rosnit slowed her pace deliberately, chastising him for walking too quickly, remarking on his silence. He answered with apologies, focusing all his will on maintaining distance. Then she stopped. She released his hand, brief relief, only to ask to see him without his eye patch. Her hand rose toward his face without waiting for consent. Michael's mind screamed, "Don't touch it," but his body, bound to the bloodline of Hedelamide, would not obey him. He could not move. That was when Eve's voice cut through the night. She stepped between them without hesitation, Sylvestian close behind her, her body unmistakably shielding Michael. Her amber eyes fixed on Rosnit, sharp and cold, accusing her of taking someone else's night. Rosnit smiled sweetly and lied without hesitation. Michael burned with anger, but watched Eve closely. She did not waver. Not even for a moment. With practiced composure, Eve dismissed the situation, returning Rosnit to Sylvestian's care. Rosnit lingered only long enough to cast one last regretful glance at Michael's eye patch before leaving the garden. When they were finally alone among the hydrangeas, Michael spoke first. He admitted his relief that Eve had arrived when she did. When he told her what Rosnit had attempted, Eve was visibly shaken, but she did not allow her confusion to surface. Instead, she apologized for leaving him alone. Michael refused to accept her apology. It was not her fault. As they turned away from the banquet hall together, the orchestra's music faded behind them. Under the quiet glow of the moon, Eve and Michael walked on, leaving the noise, the eyes, and the danger behind. A week had passed since Rosnit's birthday, and Eve had moved into the green room. The space suited her. Pale emerald wallpaper and silver birch wood blended into a quiet, garden-like atmosphere, far removed from her former residence. It was not merely larger, but complete: powder room, dining room, private office, and separate rooms for attendants and knights. Among them all, Eve favored the drawing room most, where crystal pillars rose into a rattan-shaped pergola ceiling, scattering light like dew-caught in vines. After sending Sedila off, Eve summoned Michael. He was training at the Colosseum arena as she had ordered. When he arrived later, his hair was still damp, his body freshly washed of sweat and dust. Eve noticed immediately. He spoke calmly of his sparring matches, dismissing them as forgettable. Yet his final remark revealed more than his tone suggested. Some disputes in the palace had already escalated beyond words, resolved only by steel. Eve listened, amber eyes thoughtful. Michael, it seemed, was settling into palace life faster than she had expected. With light banter and easy familiarity, they left together for the main palace. In the ceremonial office, Eve was greeted by Alban Redman, who welcomed her with visible delight. Recognizing his respect and loyalty, Eve allowed a rare intimacy by lowering her tone toward him, which Alban received with barely concealed joy. After exchanging greetings with Michael as well, Alban guided Eve into a small parlor prepared in advance. Eve revealed her purpose plainly. She intended to engage in imperial public service. Alban was surprised but pleased. Public activities were mandatory for members of the imperial family, their achievements tracked and ranked like a career. High scores granted influence and access to political authority, something Eve had long neglected in favor of alchemy. Until now, she had only met her minimum requirements through philanthropy. Alban produced a thick booklet detailing available activities. As Eve flipped through it, one particular mission caught her attention: a survey of the magical stone mining sites outside the capital. However, Alban quickly explained that such dispatch missions required far higher accumulated achievements than Eve currently possessed. When Eve expressed frustration at the cost and time required, Alban proposed an expedient solution: hosting and sponsoring charity events simultaneously through legal loopholes. Though intrigued, Eve firmly rejected any method that crossed ethical lines, ordering him to proceed only with clean, lawful measures. She also insisted on diversifying her activities to avoid suspicion. After reviewing the list again, Albin recommended sponsoring artists, though he admitted it was slow to yield results. Ultimately, Eve asked for the most immediately effective option. They settled on a visit to an orphanage in District 14, with financial support included. Eve decided to go the very next day. Albin offered practical advice, warning her not to dress too finely due to the district's proximity to the slums. Eve accepted easily. When they left the office and returned toward the detached palace, Michael spoke quietly. He had already understood her intent. She was building achievements quickly in order to gain permission to visit the magical stone mines. Eve confirmed it. She intended to investigate the conditions of the homunculus laborers herself and improve their situation as soon as possible. Michael studied her profile in silence, his gaze deepening. Before they reached their destination, Leon ran toward them in clear panic. She reported that Emperor Desmond was on his way to Eve's residence for tea. Eve was startled, but what followed drained any warmth she felt. The other princesses were coming as well. Specifically, the third princess and those aligned beneath her. Understanding the implications immediately, Eve felt her mood darken. This was no casual visit. Whatever Bridget had set in motion, it was already moving. Without another word, Eve urged them onward. They hurried back toward her residence, the calm of the spring day dissolving into tension with every step. Sedila had not yet returned from her errand outside the imperial palace when the emperor's sudden visit disrupted the green room. Rihanna, Peony, and Hugh were visibly flustered, yet they moved at once to prepare tea, restoring surface calm to a situation that was anything but. Desmond, too, entered first, radiant with imperial authority. Eve greeted him formally, the son of the Empire, and exchanged polite, rehearsed pleasantries. Then came Bridget and the older princesses. Eve bowed to them as custom demanded, receiving curt acknowledgments in return. Bridget's greeting, delivered in a cool, effortless tone, carried the weight of someone far closer to the emperor than a mere daughter should have been. They sat in order: Emperor, Bridget, the other princesses, assisted by their direct knights. Michael helped Eve into her seat. The green room, once a place of gentle silver and emerald harmony, felt stifled now, occupied by power and ambition. The knights lining the walls stood rigid, their presence sharpening the air. Eve's attention briefly drifted to Bridget's current direct knight. Elijah Halls 10, a homunculus with dark hair, pale eyes, and a tear-shaped mark beneath one eye. He was memorable precisely because he had lasted. While Bridget replaced her knights as easily as gowns, Elijah had remained. Rumors whispered why. When he met Eve's gaze, he did not lower his eyes as a homunculus should. Instead, he smiled faintly. Eve looked away at once. Tea was poured. Eve explained the blend: hibiscus and tropical fruits, light and fitting for spring. Desmond too approved, pleasantly surprised by the balance of sweetness and sourness. The older princesses followed, their expected disdain faltering into reluctant acknowledgement. Even Bridget complimented the green room itself, never dirtying her hands by direct praise. The emperor turned the conversation toward Eve, asking if she liked her new residence. Eve answered with grace, praising the room and expressing gratitude for the honor of hosting him there. Desmond too laughed, clearly pleased with himself. It was not lost on anyone that Eve, aside from Bridget, was the only princess present with a room of note. The others bristled. The conversation sharpened. Thinly veiled sarcasm followed, remarks about Eve's lack of achievements, insinuations that she had been favored without merit. Hija's words edged close to accusation. The emperor's expression hardened, and Bridget intervened smoothly, restoring order with the authority of someone accustomed to ruling the room. Then, effortlessly, Bridget redirected the topic. She mentioned the reconstruction and pioneering project in Hadelrune. The emperor brightened, pleased that his intentions were so well understood. Bridget praised the policy, expressing keen interest in participating should opportunities arise. Eve followed the flow silently, recognizing the maneuver at once. This was politics, demonstration, alignment, profit. She had seen it before, in another life. Bridget was testing the waters, gauging how much could be gained for her allies under the guise of concern for the empire. Eve knew better than to speak. In the past, she had tried and paid for it. Desmond too explained the policy himself. The eastern slums of District 14 would be relocated to the southern frontier near District 27. Bridget responded with admiration, then elaborated brilliantly on his behalf. She spoke of history, of how the slums once served as a defensive buffer, of how the land had now become valuable. She framed the relocation as necessity, efficiency, even benevolence, using the poor to reclaim land, to shield frontier districts, to serve the empire once more. The emperor laughed, delighted. "You understand me so well." Eve's fingers trembled around her teacup. To her, the words translated cleanly: land seized, lives spent, the poor sent to die under the excuse of policy. It was exile dressed as opportunity, punishment masked as progress. She realized, with bitter clarity, that what she once believed to be a single ruler's mistake had been something worse, a shared vision. Then Bridget smiled. With practiced gentleness, she spoke of compassion. "The poor are also subjects of the empire," she said. "Shouldn't a ruler care for even the humblest flower?" Eve blinked, stunned by the audacity. Before anyone could respond, Bridget continued, her voice calm and certain. "There was a way," she said, "for the poor to be reborn as true citizens through migration." And, just like that, the trap closed. Bridget, emboldened by the emperor's interest, laid out her solution with practiced calm. "Give the poor houses in the relocation area," she said. "Offer them low-interest ownership. Register them with the imperial labor camp, assign them work in the redevelopment of the slums, and collect repayment monthly. With a home and a job, they would no longer be the poor, but proper subjects who would praise the emperor's grace." Desmond, too, was clearly tempted. To him, it sounded merciful, efficient, even elegant. But Eve's hands trembled so violently that she nearly dropped her teacup. She saw through it at once. A house meant registration. Registration meant taxes. Once bound to the labor camp, there would be no escape. For a century, the slums had paid no taxes because they had served as a living barrier. Now, after extracting their usefulness, the empire intended to take their land, their labor, and their lives. Eve could no longer remain silent. She set down her teacup and spoke plainly. The slum residents would refuse to move. Bridget turned on her, sharp and incredulous, but Eve did not flinch. She reminded the emperor that the slums had protected the East for over 100 years. To now send those same people south to serve as a new barrier, under the threat of beasts, would never be accepted willingly. She continued, voice steady despite the memories clawing at her. If the Imperial Guard were sent to enforce the relocation, resistance would be crushed in the name of imperial decree. Summary punishment would follow. Blood would be spilled. And word would spread, beyond the slums, beyond the capital, of what the emperor's symbol had done to his own subjects. The room fell silent. Desmond, too, said nothing. His silence weighed heavily, pressing against Eve's chest. Beneath the table, her fingers shook, haunted by the memory of a past life where speaking out had only earned hatred and exile. Then Bridget spoke. Cold, unwavering, she suggested tighter control. Seal the slums completely. Prevent escape. Show mercy only after obedience. To her, cutting away the disobedient was simply the duty of a ruler. Eve answered without raising her voice. Blocking truth, she said, did not erase it. And it had been Bridget herself who spoke of treating the poor like flowers. Mercy should not be forgotten so easily. Bridget dismissed the poor as tax-evading burdens. Eve countered that they sustained Haidlun's economy through cheap labor. Their collapse would send shockwaves through the entire capital. The exchange grew sharp, Bridget's patience fraying. At last, Bridget accused Eve of offering nothing but opposition. Eve fell silent. That silence made Bridget smile, until Desmond too frowned and asked for Eve's answer. There were alternatives. With the Emperor's permission granted, Eve spoke again. If relocation was inevitable, the frontier had to be made genuinely safe before incentives were offered. Not promises, real security. Bridget objected immediately. There were no spare troops. If there were, District 27 would not suffer every rainy season. Eve did not look at her. She addressed only the Emperor. There was a way to secure the frontier without deploying troops. She proposed granting residences to Imperial Guard homunculi stationed near the frontier. The room froze. Homunculi were imperial property. They had never been given estates. Never been rooted to land. Even the knights along the walls stiffened in shock. Eve explained calmly. 300 elite guards lived year-round in the palace. Even assigning 10% on rotation would give the frontier enough defensive power. Housing them there would cost less than building full fortifications. And since homunculi reverted to imperial ownership upon death, the land would always return to the crown. Desmond Two's eyes lit up. He praised the idea enthusiastically, seeing at once how little it would cost and how efficiently it solved multiple problems. Eve's political sense, he declared, was exceptional. Eve accepted the praise without visible joy. Bridget, however, could not hide her agitation. She accused Eve of disgrace, of degrading the honor of knights by placing them among the poor. Eve met her gaze and replied evenly that the Empiress mattered more than a homunculus's pride. Bridget remarked that Eve had changed. Eve thanked her. Inside, she knew this was not about honor at all. It was about rights. Even a slum was still land. Even a homunculus was still a subject. This compromise would become a foundation, one she could use later. Desmond too, now thoroughly pleased, declared he would seek Eve's counsel often. As the discussion continued, Eve found herself answering question after question, shaping policy while enduring the piercing glares of the older princesses. She ignored them, sipped her tea, and calmly remained at the emperor's side, secure, for now, in his favor. After the emperor, the princesses, and their knights finally departed, the green room was left in uneasy silence. Servants moved efficiently to clear away the remnants of the visit, as if erasing the traces of discomfort. When the drawing room was empty at last, Eve sank back onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her. Her amber eyes were unfocused, drained by the weight of what had just transpired. Michael watched her quietly before asking if she was all right. Eve brushed it off at first, but soon admitted the pressure she had felt, standing her ground before Desmond too, while Bridget watched closely. She confessed her fear that speaking of homunculi might have backfired. Michael disagreed. From his perspective, the result had been favorable, state authority acknowledged, excess power redistributed. His understanding surprised Eve, reminding her that he, too, stood at the center of homunculus fate. Curious, she asked about the reactions of the knights who had witnessed her proposal. Michael described them plainly: confusion, resignation, amusement. One reaction stood out: the knight who laughed. He served the third princess. Eve immediately thought of Elijah Halston. Before the thought could settle, Rihanna announced Elijah's return. He claimed to be searching for a ribbon supposedly dropped by the third princess. Eve allowed him entry, choosing not to escalate a trivial excuse. Elijah greeted her with exaggerated courtesy, his expression lively in a way that defied the usual restraint of homunculi. He knelt, then seamlessly shifted into formal etiquette, pressing an intentionally loud kiss to the back of Eve's hand. The act was deliberate, provocative. Eve recoiled in surprise as he took his leave, smiling until the very end. Michael's anger barely stayed contained. Eve wiped her hand clean, already aware that Elijah's visit had not been ordered, it had been personal. Opportunistic. Calculated. She remembered his reputation, a homunculus who endured Bridget longer than most, skilled in charm, drawn to power. And Bridget, after all, was a leading candidate for crown princess. Eve felt irritation settle deep in her chest. Michael spoke then of palace customs, games and wagers where direct knights could become prizes. Eve rejected the idea immediately. As long as Michael was her knight, she knew attention would come, but she had no intention of entertaining it. When Michael asked what she would do if such a contest became unavoidable, Eve answered without hesitation: they would win. The certainty in her voice surprised him. It was not confidence born of arrogance, but determination unyielding and absolute. Then she smiled and said, simply, that she would never give him to anyone else. In that moment, something tightened in Michael's chest. His vision filled with her, too bright, too vivid. For someone who had lived 19 years in stagnation, the world she showed him was blinding. And he understood, clearly and irrevocably, that the bond had already been formed. He had imprinted on her. The next day, Eve and Michael embarked on an extraordinary outing to the House of Laurel, an orphanage in District 14, part of the imperial public activities. For this occasion, her appearance required careful attention. Lien had spent the morning searching for the perfect outfit, a light blue dress with puffed sleeves, adorned with a white frill apron and a ribbon tied at the waist. White knee socks peeked from beneath, practical for movement, and her lime blonde hair was braided and secured with a long ribbon. Michael, her escort, had abandoned his Imperial Guard uniform for a traveler's leather robe, gray cloak, and loosely hung sword. He carried the casual, effortless charm of a wanderer, as though any outfit suited him. Eve pulled her cloak tighter against the slight chill, feeling a thrill of anticipation. Though some feared the outfit might undermine her dignity, she felt free. The streets outside were alive with color and movement. Houses with bright triangular roofs lined the avenues, where carriages and pedestrians jostled side by side. Plazas bustled with vendors, fountains sprayed glittering water, and the smell of food mingled with the scent of the city. It was dizzying and exhilarating. "This is the real outside world," Eve said. "So many different people, so alive." Michael studied the scene quietly. The palace is orderly, but here, there's energy. It's a different world. After finishing their visit and delivering donations to the orphanage, Eve admired how effortlessly Michael had handled the children. As they returned toward the carriage, she noticed it was still early and suggested they explore the city instead of going back to the palace. Michael agreed. Leading him through familiar alleys of District 14, Eve asked him to stop calling her princess outside. After some hesitation, he finally called her by her name, Eve, startling her with a fleeting memory of her past life before she brushed it aside. Instead of the black market, they found a seasonal festival market filling the plaza. Stalls surrounded a dry fountain, performers entertained the crowds, and the square buzzed with energy. Eve linked arms with Michael so they wouldn't get separated and guided him through the lively streets, admiring crafts, tasting snacks, and watching performers. Drawn by an announcement, they joined the crowd for a troupe performance. That was when a sharp cry cut through the night. Eve looked towards the commotion, but suddenly a girl dashed out of the dark alleyway, headed straight for Eve. But Michael's quick reflexes prevented what could have been a painful collision. The man retreated, but not before shouting bitterly at the girl, calling her Ramona and accusing her of throwing away her chance. The name struck Eve like lightning. Lamona Lund. In her past life, she had been the most beloved singer of the Yellow River, a voice capable of soothing even Eve's loneliest nights in the Imperial Palace. Eve had once treasured recordings of her songs. Recognition dawned just as applause thundered from the square. The performance had ended, and music swelled again. Lamona's expression shifted in horror. Her stage. She ran toward the plaza, but the crowd was too thick. Before she could push through, singing reached her ears. Another woman, dressed similarly, was already performing in her place. Lamona froze. The opportunity that came only once a season had been taken. Tears welled up and spilled freely. The proud girl who had just kicked a man without hesitation now cried openly, hurling furious curses at the troupe and the extremist's son who had stolen her chance. Eve watched quietly. The tender, graceful image she remembered from her past life was far removed from this raw, grieving young woman. When Lamona finally turned back, Eve offered her a handkerchief. Lamona accepted it without hesitation, introducing herself properly and insisting she would repay the kindness. Her pride would not allow her to accept help without returning it. Eve hesitated. She could not reveal her identity as the seventh princess over something so trivial, nor did she want to lie. Instead, she observed the way Lamona bit her lip, pretending strength while barely holding back tears. Gently, Eve asked if she truly wanted help. Lamona dismissed it as something beyond saving. The troupe had already replaced her. The stage was lost. But Eve knew better. As someone who had once been comforted by Lamona's songs, she could not walk away. The greatest unknown singer of the season had just been silenced by petty interference. It was absurd. When the curtain rose, Lamona's voice filled the square with a powerful warmth that captivated the audience. Even without stage magic, her singing alone held the crowd spellbound. The performance ended in thunderous applause and overwhelming cheers for an encore. With her voice and Eve's subtle magic, Lamona's stage became the most unforgettable performance of the Pegasus Troops Festival. They stood in the crowd and Eve watched the young singer with proud eyes. Michael commented on Eve's persistence to help Lamona as she'd given a large sum of money to sponsor the girl, but Eve only answered with a mysterious smile. As they turned to leave, Lamona rushed off stage and called out to Eve. She realized Eve had helped her but misunderstood that Eve was acting on behalf of a master. Choosing to conceal her identity, Eve introduced herself simply as Eve, and they bid Lamona farewell. On the carriage ride back, Eve struggled with her thoughts. The sponsorship contract included a clause hiding her identity, and she questioned why she had chosen secrecy when it brought her no real advantage. Yet, she had instinctively hidden who she was. Michael quietly pointed out that she now made exceptions for others, though she had once allowed only him close. His words unsettled her. When he suggested that her feelings toward Lamona resembled those of commoners forming friendships, Eve finally understood. She wanted to meet Lamona again not as a princess, but as someone who could be treated warmly and freely. Realizing this, she flushed with embarrassment. The idea of having a friend was new to her. Curious, she asked if Michael had any friends of his own, but he gave no answer before the carriage arrived at the imperial palace. After escorting her back, Michael returned to the homunculus knight's quarters, where he now shared a room with Sylvestian. His roommate had only just returned from an overnight absence and spoke bitterly about his duties, clearly exhausted. When Eve was mentioned, Michael reacted with quiet irritation. Later, as Sylvestian fell asleep, Michael reflected on Eve's words about friendship and found the idea strangely displeasing. Meanwhile, Eve's days at the palace grew steadily busier. She attended social gatherings with nobles, participated in public duties, followed the progress of various business ventures, and continued her studies at the library to prepare for future events she remembered from her past life. She occasionally spent tea time with Emperor Desmond II and was even invited to a council meeting discussing frontier development. Drawing on knowledge from her previous life, Eve proposed that the fertility of lands once plagued by demons came from decomposed sandworm remains, suggesting their use as fertilizer and a foundation for agricultural and alchemical industries. Her insight impressed the council and opened possibilities for economic and scientific growth. The emperor proudly revealed that several major policies, previously credited elsewhere, had actually been Eve's work. The nobles were astonished, and their attitudes toward her shifted from curiosity to admiration and even ambition, as one marquis attempted to propose a marriage alliance before being firmly stopped. As the meeting ended successfully, Eve returned to her residence satisfied. Her contributions were now officially recognized, and past misunderstandings about her achievements would soon be corrected. It had been a truly rewarding day. Bridget's residence became a silent storm. In her elegant bedroom, she vented her humiliation by cutting down apple roses, flowers whose pale green petals resembled Eve's lime-blonde hair. She drowned them in heavy perfume, filling the room with suffocating fragrance. Her anger stemmed from the Supreme Council meeting, where Marquis Limitiello publicly revealed that the frontier policies and peace migration policy, credit Bridget had claimed, were actually Eve's ideas. Bridget's excuse failed, leaving her disgraced before the court. Furious and shaken, she dismissed everyone except Elijah. Michael arrived from the knight's waiting room and halted the moment he saw her. For a brief instant, he simply stared, his usual composure wavering. His greeting came late, his voice quieter than usual as he praised her beauty with sincere seriousness. Eve teased him lightly, saying she had dressed well to inspire his loyalty, but Michael accepted her words without embarrassment, answering that her efforts were indeed effective. Their exchange drew gentle laughter from the room, yet beneath the humor lingered an unspoken intimacy, his steady gaze, and her subtle satisfaction at his reaction. They shared herbal tea grown from Eve's own garden, the atmosphere calm and domestic. Michael's attention, however, remained fixed on her appearance and the unusual formality of her attire. Sensing something important, he questioned her schedule before even tasting his tea. When he learned she would attend the princess's gathering without an escort, his expression hardened. To him, protection was not mere duty but purpose itself, and the thought of leaving her unguarded troubled him deeply. Even after Sedila explained the custom, Michael struggled to accept it, his concern lingering in his eyes though he voiced no further protest. Eve noticed. Sensing his unease, she deliberately softened her tone and dismissed him early, framing it as consideration for his training. She encouraged him to spend the day at the Colosso Arena, giving him freedom while reassuring him with calm authority. Michael accepted her order, but promised to remain nearby and asked her to summon him at any time. The seriousness in his voice revealed his reluctance to leave her side. That quiet insistence stirred Eve's concern rather than comfort. After sending him off, she found herself thinking about his words. The warning in his tone lingered in her mind, reminding her of the growing tension surrounding her. Bridget's recent disgrace might lead to retaliation, and danger might fall not only upon herself, but also upon those closest to her. Rather than fearing for her own safety, Eve worried about Michael. She secretly ordered a servant to watch the Colosso Arena and immediately report if anything happened to him. It was a silent act of protection, one he would never know. With her preparations complete, Eve steadied herself. The princess's tea time awaited her like hostile territory, yet her thoughts remained divided half on the political battlefield ahead and half on the knight she had sent away from her side. At the end of the Eastern Palace corridor, Eve entered the grand chamber alone. One by one, the princesses arrived, with Bridget last. Once all were seated, the door shut, sealing the gathering. Tea was served next, prepared by Rosinette. Its harsh bitterness nearly made Eve frown, yet she politely praised it, refusing to provoke conflict. After discreetly purifying the tea, she drank without complaint. Then Bridget finally revealed her purpose. With cold satisfaction, she declared that the gathering had been arranged for Eve's sake. The older princesses claimed concern for their youngest sister, insisting they must advise her on handling her direct knight. Their words carried thinly veiled mockery, and the room's atmosphere sharpened. Sensing the trap, Eve steadied herself as Bridget invited a frank conversation among women. Surrounded by her sisters, Eve faced what felt like a quiet battlefield. At the same time, Michael remained at the Colosso Arena, studying the training of other homunculus. Though skilled individually, they lacked awareness of one another, unable to fight cooperatively. The weakness troubled him. When Sylvestion arrived, Michael spoke seriously of future dangers, the declining supply of magic crystals, the inevitable campaign against demon dragons, and the needless deaths caused by homunculus fighting alone. For the first time, he considered cooperation essential. Sylvestion was startled. Michael, who once cared for no one, now worried about others. Even Michael himself could not explain why. After Sylvestion departed, Michael prepared to train, but 2 royal guards suddenly summoned him. Without explanation, they escorted him deep beyond the arena, through gardens and into a secluded forest. The situation was unmistakably hostile. Realizing he had been lured away while Eve attended tea time, Michael silently prepared himself for what awaited. Meanwhile, unaware of the trap closing elsewhere, Eve continued her confrontation with her sisters. Within the imperial palace, it was common for royal family members to harass one another indirectly by targeting each other's direct knights. Though petty, such cruelty was considered a refined way to avoid open conflict. Michael had long heard of these practices during training, so even as danger approached, his mind remained calm. If he became the target, at least Eve would remain safe while attending the princess's tea time. Led deep into the windbreak forest, he quickly sensed something was wrong. The forest was unnaturally silent. No arena noise, no birds, no movement. A barrier had been raised to isolate the area. There, he encountered the 6th Princess Stefania and the 6th Prince Derek, accompanied by their own direct knights. From their conversation, Michael understood the reason. Bridget's resentment toward Eve had led to this retaliation. He respectfully introduced himself and knelt before them despite the sharp gravel cutting into his knees. Derek deliberately pressed his shoulder, forcing him down harder, while the 2 accompanying homunculus restrained him further. Blood seeped through Michael's clothes, yet he showed no reaction. Stefania mocked his loyalty to Eve, ridiculing him as nothing more than a devoted dog. She revealed the true purpose of summoning him, rumors that Eve was incapable of properly controlling her direct knight. Under the pretense of concern, she began questioning Michael about his service to the 7th princess. Their interrogation quickly turned into humiliation. They implied that Eve had failed to conduct the expected rituals of ownership over her knight and twisted Michael's silence into proof of her inadequacy. Every answer he gave was distorted, every word used to insult both him and Eve. Michael endured the mockery without resistance. Even as they denied his dignity as a knight and treated him as a mere object, he chose silence rather than allow his words to harm Eve's reputation. Kneeling in pain and humiliation, Michael held firmly to his loyalty, accepting the insult alone so that none of it would reach his princess. Michael tried to defend Eve, insisting that the princess did not treat him as a mere tool. Yet the words never left his mouth. In the corrupted imperial palace, Eve alone remained his source of comfort. Stefania and Derek then openly declared Michael unfit to serve as a direct knight. They accused him of failing his duties, claiming a homunculus who could not satisfy the royal family, especially at night, deserved demotion. Using the Homunculus Management Act as justification, they planned to strip him of his rank, seal his mana circuits, and condemn him to a lifetime of labor in the magic or mines. From the beginning, their goal had been clear: create a reason to eliminate Michael and shame Eve. They decided to permanently maim him to justify his dismissal. Bound by his oath of loyalty to the imperial family, Michael could not resist their authority. When their knights drew their swords, he instinctively reached for his own weapon but stopped, realizing that even self-defense would be seen as treason without Eve present. Choosing survival, he endured in silence, preparing himself for the attack. At the same time, Eve faced humiliation of her own. During a tea gathering, her elder sisters questioned her about Michael's absence from her bedchamber, mocking her for failing to use her direct knight properly. They spoke openly of homunculi as bedroom servants, disguising cruelty as concern. Eve, disgusted by the palace's depravity, silently strengthened her resolve to abolish the entire system. They pressed her relentlessly, suggesting Michael was defective, questioning her competence, and even offering to educate her. When Bridget implied taking control of Michael herself, Eve's expression turned cold. Calm but firm, Eve declared that her relationship with Sir Agnito was her own affair and that no one else had the right to interfere. Her flawless response ended the discussion, forcing the princesses to change the subject. As they shifted to discussing magic crystal mining, a topic tied to the exploitation of homunculi, Eve grew uneasy. She knew such conversations always led to further suffering for beings like Michael. Then a strange bird call sounded from the balcony, a secret signal meant only for her. Realizing Michael was in danger, Eve nearly dropped her teacup. Memories of the brutal treatment homunculi endured filled her with dread. Knowing Michael's future importance and strength, she feared that continued humiliation would not only harm him, but one day lead to the Empire's downfall. And for the first time that day, Eve felt genuine panic. Eve remembered the promise she had made to Michael on the day he swore allegiance to her, that she would protect him as his princess. Recalling the trust in his smile, she resolved she would never be late in keeping that promise. To reach him, she first had to escape the tea gathering. While the princesses discussed increasing magic crystal production, suggesting stricter homunculus rankings, forced labor expansion, and even large-scale demon-dragon subjugation, Eve recognized the cruelty behind their words. The discussion only confirmed her suspicions that the same people speaking now were responsible for Michael's situation. With no natural way to leave, she chose a drastic solution. Pretending to drink tea, Eve secretly cast layered sleep magic. Though Bridget possessed strong resistance to mental magic, Eve combined higher-level weakening spells with precise timing. When Bridget's guard faltered mid-speech, the spell took hold. Her protection magic shattered, and she collapsed onto the table. Eve quickly put Isel and Hija to sleep as well. Calmly, she claimed the princesses had simply fallen asleep from exhaustion and ended the tea time. With permission to leave secured, Eve immediately moved to the balcony and leapt from the 4th floor, using flight magic to land safely below. Her composure vanished the moment she reached the ground. Guided by a servant's signal, she learned Michael had been forcibly taken toward the northern garden. After giving swift instructions, Eve flew toward the location. Surveillance golems blocked by a barrier revealed where he was being held. Burning with urgency and anger, Eve landed before the magical barrier surrounding the windbreak forest. Determined not to fail Michael, she focused her power and struck it with all her strength. The barrier cracked under her heel. He refused to draw his blade, knowing that unsheathing it before royalty would be used as proof of treason. Stefania and Derek's knights closed in from both sides, strengthening their swords with magic. They mocked Michael's restraint and ordered his limbs severed so he would lose his status as a direct knight. Bound by his oath and lacking skill in defensive magic, Michael realized he had only two choices: resist and be executed for threatening the imperial family, or accept mutilation and live as a disgraced homunculus. Thinking of Eve and the burden his actions would place on her, Michael chose sacrifice. He abandoned resistance, thrust his sword into the ground, and offered his arm willingly. As the greatsword descended to strike, the barrier above suddenly cracked. Eve broke through from the sky, shattering the magical enclosure and landing directly between Michael and the attacking knight. Without hesitation, she blocked the strike with her own body. The knights immediately withdrew and knelt in terror before the 7th princess. Relieved to find Michael alive, Eve's brief sigh quickly turned into cold fury as she saw his injuries and ruined uniform. Realizing how close he had come to destruction, her expression hardened. Maintaining a formal tone, she addressed Michael first, ordering him to rise, then turned her gaze towards Stefania and Derek. Calmly but mercilessly, Eve exposed the situation, how they had lured her knight into isolation, forced him to kneel on gravel, and attacked him 2 against 1 while he never even drew his sword. Feigning polite understanding, she revealed their true intention. The moment Michael defended himself, they would have accused him of attempting to murder the imperial family. And with that accusation laid bare, their scheme stood exposed before her. Stefania and Derek froze, cold sweat on their brows. Her presence alone forced the knights to hesitate. Calmly, she picked up Michael's long sword, instructing him to take it while still holding the scabbard herself. Michael obeyed, feeling the weight of the sword settle fully into his hands. Eve spoke softly, her amber eyes sharp and resolute. The Imperial Palace is a series of riots. You can't just avoid conflict. These two subdue them. The sword flashed in her hand, light spilling from its edge. Michael, guided by her command, moved with precision and power, his blade dancing like scattering ashes. The numerical disadvantage meant nothing. He was in his element. Stefania and Derek's confusion turned to panic as Eve's voice cut through. She explained that Michael's actions were her command, a direct response to their attempted provocation. No misinterpretation could stand. The blame lay squarely on their heads. The balance of power had shifted. Michael stood unharmed, the royal siblings defeated in embarrassment, and Eve's authority as both strategist and protector was made clear. The incident ended rather dull as Eve promised no punishment so long as the princess and prince offered Michael a proper apology. And after an indignant moment, the two siblings swallowed their pride and offered an apology, albeit reluctantly. They had also revealed Bridget's scheme to have Eve's personal knight dismissed from her side. She looked to the female knight and gave praise about her excellent barrier before ordering to open it. Eve looked back at Michael and with a smile said, "Shall we head back?" The beech tree hedges formed a quiet tunnel, the forest path secluded enough that the only sound was the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. Eve led the way, her posture effortless, the faint sway of her gown brushing against the foliage. Behind her, Michael followed 2 steps back, silent and attentive, his presence both protective and unobtrusive. The aftermath of the day's chaos still lingered in the air, the humiliating defeat of Stefania and Derek, the controlled mastery of the Snowlet and Retriever homunculi, and the careful orchestration of every conflict by Eve herself. Eve stopped abruptly. Michael froze instinctively, sensing the subtle shift in her mood. She turned, amber eyes gleaming with a cool intensity that made him keenly aware of the responsibility he bore, not just as her knight, but as someone bound to her trust and safety. "When I arrived, why was the sword in your hand?" Her tone was gentle, almost inquisitive, yet there was an undeniable edge beneath it. Michael's throat tightened. He had predicted such a moment, yet the words he had prepared faltered. Honesty, duty, and a sense of inevitability mingled in his chest, leaving him little choice but to speak. "If you had been charged with attempted murder of the imperial family," he began carefully, "the consequences would have fallen on you. I could have prevented the danger myself, but doing so might have placed you in even greater risk. I acted to protect you and fulfill my duty as your direct knight." Eve's amber gaze did not waver. Though her expression was calm, Michael could sense her unspoken concern, the way her mind weighed both the circumstances and the human cost. She had promised to protect him, and here he stood, honoring that trust while adhering to his own duty. Without prompting, he lowered himself into a formal kneel, pressing his hands to the ground. His voice was steady and solemn. "It was not presumptuous to doubt your ability, princess, but to act without regard for the consequences of my duty would have been reckless. I ask your forgiveness for any offense my judgment may have caused." Eve's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly. He was being earnest, humble yet proud in his service. She allowed him to rise, and when his violet eyes met hers, there was a depth there she had rarely seen, a window into his true feelings, raw and unshielded. "Thank you for saving me," he said softly, voice steady despite the emotions beneath it. "I survived because of your protection. I will always believe in you." Eve felt warmth rising in her chest, a rare flutter at the sincerity of his words. When Michael reached for her hand and pressed a reverent kiss to her fingertips, delicate as the touch of a spring breeze, she felt a faint, unfamiliar thrill. The gesture, small and respectful, lingered in her mind, coloring the moment with intimacy. The air between them carried the quiet weight of mutual respect, duty, and unspoken trust. "I realize today," Michael said quietly, "that I am fortunate to be your direct knight. Until the day you ascend the throne, I wish to serve you with my whole heart and my entire being. Will you allow me?" Eve's breath caught. The honesty in his eyes, the certainty in his tone, pierced through the careful composure she had maintained for years. She had chosen him in this life, and now he was choosing her with the same unwavering sincerity. Yes, she replied, the single word carrying all the weight of command, trust, and mutual understanding. Michael knelt briefly once more, kissing her hand lightly before rising. Eve felt the faintest blush as she registered the intimacy, a soft warmth that reminded her of the human tenderness that could exist even amidst duty and discipline. "Let's get your knees treated," she said softly, turning toward the residence. When the healer departed, a heavy quiet settled over the drawing room. Curiosity and restrained concern filled the air. Eve gathered everyone to the table, an ironic second tea gathering in one day. She took a calm sip of milk tea before speaking. There had been a conflict with the sixth princess and sixth prince. The attendants stiffened, but they did not overreact. Cedila's earlier warning had prepared them. Then Eve recounted everything: Bridget's manipulation at tea, the trap in the windbreak forest, the barrier, the provocation, the attempt to maim Michael, and how it ended. As the story progressed, fear gave way to indignation. The vulgarity of the imperial family's behavior shocked them more than the violence itself. Cedila's composure remained intact, but her eyes sharpened. She accepted responsibility, not for the insult, but for allowing such rumors to circulate unchecked. From this day forward, she vowed stricter control over the residence and its reputation. The others followed suit, pledging loyalty in their own ways. It felt less like servants speaking and more like retainers swearing quiet oaths. Evening had fallen by the time the conversation ended. Cedila gently suggested that Eve dine privately in her chambers rather than maintain formal appearances. Then she added, almost casually, that perhaps Sir Agnito might join her. Eve hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Michael accepted without question, treating the invitation as an extension of duty. He rose to return to the knight's quarters to wash, but Lien stopped him. With his injured hand and knees, assistance would be necessary. The attendants tried not to look triumphant. Michael allowed himself a small inward smile. Now everything made sense. The atmosphere had shifted. This was no ordinary washing. And for the first time since the windbreak forest, Michael realized that the true battlefield of the day might not have been the one fought with swords. Now that an opportunity had presented itself, Cedila's intentions were unmistakable. The controversy in the windbreak forest would be neatly resolved, not through argument, but by restoring palace-style honor. And in the imperial palace, honor between a princess and her direct knight was often interpreted in only one way. Michael was not angry. If anything, he understood. The attendants had witnessed the vulgar underbelly of palace culture for the first time today. In their eyes, the cleanest way to erase humiliation was to reaffirm status. Still, one quiet suspicion flickered in his mind. Had the princess ordered this? The thought unsettled him more than the arrangement itself. When he changed into the new uniform laid out for him, Peony and Lien were already carrying dishes toward Eve's bedroom. Not the green room's dining chamber. The bedroom. Michael exhaled slowly. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. When Cedila returned and invited him in, his legs moved before his heart could steady itself. He crossed the threshold, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed louder than it should have. Eve greeted him while reading a stack of papers, her posture relaxed, chemise dress soft and unstructured, her freshly dried hair resting over one shoulder. The ivory fabric, embroidered with small flowers, hovered somewhere between indoor comfort and something more intimate. It was not revealing, but it was close enough to unsettle. Only after he sat did she set aside the documents. She had been studying. The normalcy of it eased him slightly. They spoke of research, of goals, of ambitions she had only recently set into motion. She referred to them casually as homework, but Michael could sense the scale of what she intended. She did not name succession aloud, yet it lingered in the room like an unspoken vow. Dinner was served: cream spaghetti, lamb steak, salad, sangria. Eve observed Michael's table manners with quiet interest. When she suggested they dine together more often, he flinched almost imperceptibly before recovering. He answered with composure. She smiled easily, unaware of the internal war raging beneath his calm exterior. After the plates were cleared, only the two of them remained. The watch golem hung in a cage from the ceiling, bumping softly against invisible barriers, its long tail twitching. Eve explained she would not release the recording, not yet. It was too early to confront the third princess directly. When Sedila and Peony excused themselves with overly cheerful goodnights, Michael felt tension surge back into his spine. The air shifted. The room grew quieter. Eve brewed tea herself this time. Her movements were steady, elegant, unhurried. There was no trace of hidden motive in her expression. No coyness. No suggestion. His suspicion began to feel shameful. She sat across from him, amber eyes steady. Then she told him she would rest in her room tonight. For a split second, Michael's thoughts went completely white. In Imperial Palace grammar, such phrasing had only one established meaning. Serve tonight. It was an order. His training resurfaced automatically, lessons from the camp, warnings, expectations. He drained his cup of tea in one swallow, only to find his throat drier than before. He placed the empty cup down carefully. Eve noticed. By the time she tilted her head at him, he had already forced himself to decide. If this was duty, he would fulfill it. He drew a slow breath, met her eyes directly, and spoke with controlled solemnity. In the Imperial Palace, when a royal commanded rest for the night, it meant attending them. He said it carefully, clarifying the meaning rather than assuming it. Because despite everything, the oils, the bedroom dinner, the servants scheming, one doubt remained in his chest. He did not know which meaning she intended. And for the first time that evening, the battle was not political. It was personal. Eve's amber eyes widened faintly when she looked at Michael. He, meanwhile, had already lowered his gaze, bracing himself for something dreadful. He began speaking in a tone far too serious for the situation. If his understanding was correct, from now on, it would be helpful if she informed him of her preferences. The imperial family, according to what he had learned at the training center, tended to be affectionate above the waist and rough below it. Eve blinked 7 times. Then she understood. Then she wished she hadn't. Internally, she screamed about what exactly they were teaching at that training camp. Closing it down would not be enough. It needed to be reduced to rubble. Michael stood there with a strained, slightly pained expression, eyes lowered, lips tightening as if suppressing discomfort. Unfortunately, the restraint only made him more dangerously attractive. The severe beauty he usually sealed behind discipline was leaking out through embarrassment. It was harmful. Truly harmful. Eve cast mental stabilization magic on herself just to regain control of her thoughts. Then she corrected him. She hadn't meant that kind of rest. She had simply intended for him to stay in her room overnight, purely in appearance. Spread rumors. Establish presence. Leave in the morning. Nothing more. Just sleep. Michael froze. He had, apparently, been mentally preparing to serve her in every literal sense. The realization hit him hard. He covered his eyes with one hand, half in shock, half in self-reproach. Why had his thoughts gone there so quickly? He had never lost his composure like that before. He told himself it must be the engraving, the imprinting bond. Some distortion of instinct. Eve, watching him spiral, felt guilty instead. She carefully explained the strategy: follow imperial customs outwardly, gain political leverage inwardly. It was cowardly, perhaps, but efficient. A simple illusion. Michael disagreed gently. It wasn't cowardly. It was pragmatic. They negotiated calmly after that. Once a week would be sufficient. Wednesdays. Dinner together. He would remain overnight and leave in the morning looking appropriately tired. A large couch would be prepared in her bedroom. The staff would not be told the truth. If you wished to deceive your enemies, you had to deceive your allies first. Michael mentioned they would need to leave a believable trail. Eve immediately handed that responsibility to him. The first stage overnight visit proceeded flawlessly. By morning, rumors spread across the imperial palace that Michael had been thoroughly exhausted by the princess. Eve pretended not to know. Balba Riblo delivered Michael's new sword. Night Ray. A long blade forged from mithril and black gold, its hilt engraved with a classical Leviathan motif. It moved like an extension of his arm. It lacked only one thing: a magic stone in the hilt. Michael insisted it wasn't necessary. Eve insisted it would be filled properly. Then she surprised him. On the sunlit balcony, surrounded by herbs, she performed a knight's oath ceremony for him, something homunculi rarely received properly. The inauguration ceremony ended beneath the warm sunlight of the balcony. The night ray rested once more at Michael's side, but something invisible had changed between them. The oath had not been empty words. It had settled quietly, deeply, into the air. Eve admitted that she had simply wanted to give him a proper ceremony. A knight deserved one. Even a homunculus. Michael, who had never received a true knighting ritual in the training camp, felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. He could not call it pride, nor gratitude alone. It was heavier than that. When she asked whether the oath's wording had felt unfair, whether pledging obedience even unto death had offended him, he answered honestly. It had not offended him. It felt strange, as though the engraving between them had deepened. Eve fought to keep her composure at that comment. She had not meant to strengthen anything. It had simply been a gesture of acknowledgement. Yet the bond between them seemed to thrum quietly in response. And so Michael offered Eve his thanks and promised her something in return, if it was within his power. Eve looked thoughtful for a moment before she asked him to participate in the upcoming monster hunting competition, to rank as one of the top scorers. Michael smiled and promised to bring Eve the highest honor and glory. 3 days later, the imperial family's beast hunting contest finally opened. Galapagon Island, far from the ecliptic, far from comfort, was a place the Empire treated like a pantry. The beasts were not exterminated, only sealed within barriers, kept alive like a living stockpile. The island itself was a breeding ground for demons, and every tendon, scale, fong, and gland was valuable to alchemy. In an empire that worshipped alchemy, the hunt was less a sport than a harvest festival. And even though it was held on a distant island, more than 100 noble families arrived as if summoned by instinct, made possible by the long-range warp portal the imperial palace boasted of like a miracle. Eve stepped through the portal with Michael at her side. They emerged onto a floating stone high above the island, an improvised observatory ringed with wooden railings, where the whole wild mass of Galapagon spread beneath them. Mountain ridges like serrated blades. Forest canopy packed so tightly it looked like a dark sea. No civilization at all, except this platform and the narrow structures built to manage the crowd. Michael's gaze traced the terrain in quiet assessment. The rawness of it was almost offensive to palace-bred senses. Above them, harpies and wyverns wheeled through the air, their cries cutting across the wind. Below, behemoths and gargoyles clashed for territory like quarreling lords. Even the plants were wrong roots that writhed like living rope in swamp water, carnivorous petals opening and closing with too much intention, bright enough to seduce low-intelligence beasts into their own deaths. Galapagon's ecosystem was not merely hostile. It was alien. Being stranded here would be a slow sentence. It reminded Eve grimly why exile to this place had once been considered a form of execution. Guided by guards, they descended on disc wings to the ground, where a fenced outpost had been built for convenience, a cleared lot packed with participants, attendants, and spectators. Noisy like a banquet hall that had been stripped of chandeliers and replaced with monster cries. Eve's arrival drew attention immediately. Not long ago, she would have been ignored as a quiet princess tucked away with alchemy. Now she carried weight, the engraved monster of the public prison, the green room, the pioneering policy tied to Desmond II, pearl ink that had already become legend among the aristocracy. Nobles began drifting toward her, hungry for conversation. Eve did not reward them with even a glance. Eve stopped Michael and she pulled off her silken hair tie which she wrapped around the hilt of his blade. Eve smiled at Michael as she said softly, "Be careful." Michael bent at the waist and laid a gentle kiss atop her hand in answer. The crowd of onlookers watched, some in admiration, while others with envy clear in the sharp gazes. Then the horn sounded. A massive note, made from demon dragon horn, rolled across the island like thunder. The barrier opened. The hunt began. Participants scattered into the forest's mouth, dark as a monster's throat. Rosenit approached Eve, ready to antagonize her, but Eve paid her no mind as she left the fourth princess and entered the tent designated for nobles. And it was there she spotted a familiar face. Anais Lysiard. Just moments before Eve's arrival, Anais spoke of her recent success and luck. Anais spoke casually of buying mines, of expanding investment, of raising the Lysiard chamber to the top. Her tone was light, but her words were a flex. She had money, momentum, and a benefactor's favor behind her. And just as the ladies grew curious about Anissa's hand in luck, Eve appeared. She joined the conversation easily as she spoke of her recent interest in public sanitation. And it just so happened that she stumbled upon Anissa's bathhouse endeavor. The ladies soon sang Eve's praises at her recent bouts of success. Eve skillfully waved them off as she excused herself and Anais for a private chat. Alone, Eve and Anais spoke with the ease of allies who had already survived risk together. Anais confessed she had seen Bridget watching her earlier with frightening intensity. Eve admitted Bridget's hostility had already turned into action, attempting to steal credit, stirring conflict, using the regular tea time as cover to harm Michael through proxy cruelty. Anais listened, worry tightening her face. The third princess was not merely irritated. She had begun interpreting Eve's existence as a political challenge. Then Anais asked the question that mattered. Was Eve aiming for the sun? Was she trying to become crown princess? Eve's smile disappeared completely. Only seriousness remained. She answered without denying it. Anais's response was immediate. She knelt, kissed the back of Eve's hand, and pledged loyalty until death. Eve lifted her, promising she would one day prove how wise that choice had been. Then they returned to the crowd as if nothing had happened, shoulder to shoulder, smiling like socialites, carrying a private vow like a weapon under silk. The nobles murmured, predicting the winner as if making bets on weather. Some named Sylvestre. Some named Michael. Eve said nothing, but her thoughts betrayed her. In her past life, this contest had been Sylvestre's debut, his rise to unstoppable dominance, until Michael eventually arrived and took the title of strongest away. Now the roles had shifted. Now Michael wore her ribbon. She answered Anisa's teasing question without hesitation. Of course her knight would win. From afar, Rosenet's ruby eyes snapped toward her like a blade. The waiting grew boring, as the hunt always did. So the spectators turned to their own entertainments. They boarded the Sky Ark, a cruise ship floating in the air, protected by a high-level barrier, circling Galapagos slowly so they could admire the island's violent beauty and watch for signs of participants below. Dark clouds began gathering in the west, rolling over mountain peaks. Spring rain, perhaps. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Michael moved with precise efficiency. He marked the beasts he killed with Eve's mana, proof of his slaying, counted later. But the smaller prey was meaningless. He needed rarity. He needed Galamut's lair. His disadvantage was geography, his first time on this island, hunting blind. Then a swarm of swamp nepenthes attacked. Carnivorous plant beasts with shark-like jaws inside dazzling petals, roots moving like tentacles beneath the swamp, dragging prey under to drink them. Michael cut them down quickly, even the unusually large one. But as he approached to mark it, the creature closed like a bud and detonated. No blast, only purple smoke. Poisonous pollen. Michael covered his nose and mouth instantly, wind ripping the smoke into a vortex before it dispersed into the sky. Then he sensed someone nearby and turned. Snoret Wint stood there, the barrier master, Derek's direct knight. They spoke briefly, almost casually, as if they weren't surrounded by monsters. Snoret warned him, pollen spread meant this region would become a Nepenthes forest. Michael asked what he truly needed. Where was Galamut's rarity? Snoret, who had competed here for years, answered without hesitation. She drew a glowing schematic in the air, marking the location for him like a quiet repayment. Michael thanked her. And without wasting another breath, he moved. Toward the lair. Toward the place where the strongest prey waited. And above the canopy, the sky darkened, rain gathering like an omen. Michael followed Snoret's directions and climbed toward Galamut's lair, cutting through swamps, slime meadows, and a spider cave until the mountain turned bleak and graveyard dry. Gargoyles tried him on the way. Night Ray erased them with practiced impatience. Near the lair, Sylvestre appeared, an ambush that turned out to be more timing than hostility. Their goals overlapped, so they moved together and found the cavern, a sea of golden lights that were actually behemoth eyes. The pack surged. Michael and Sylvestre carved through them in brutal sync, careful not to ruin the valuable fur. By the time the beasts fled whining, Michael realized, almost casually, that the larger one he'd already dropped had been the boss. Sylvestre looked like he wanted to argue, but the evidence was piled at their feet. Elijah Halston arrived late, oozing that special brand of palace venom implying foul play, needling Sylvestre about night service, and taking a swipe at Michael's loyalty for sport. Sylvestre held himself together like a man choking on courtesy. Elijah left satisfied. In the aftermath, a detail surfaced. Elijah had once almost failed the training camp's fallout test, saved only because someone abstained in his place. The coincidence tugged at Michael's old scars, and he shut the door on the memory before it could open. Then the rain came, real rain, the kind that doesn't bless anything. The ground trembled. Gargoyles fled like they'd heard a prophecy. Cracks split the mountainside and black thought energy bled out, swelling into one vast mass. Michael corrected Sylvestre's "so many" with a grim truth. It was one. Galamut's thought body formed horned, winged, empty-eyed, and bleeding rage, and its voice crawled directly into their minds. It tested Sylvestian first, swallowing him into darkness and dragging up a painful memory, but Michael cut him free and warned him about mental interference. Michael fought like the dragon's curses were background noise, until Galamut called him king of the homunculus and, worse, spoke of an engraving. That landed like a blade between ribs. Michael ran. Back at the outpost, Eve saw black energy rising and couldn't find Michael among the returning knights. Before she could move, Galamut's thought body broke the barrier and poured in. Bridget organized the defense with cold efficiency. Homunculi and mages slammed the thought body with everything they had. It didn't matter. Galamut wasn't there to win a battle, it was there to look. It locked onto Eve. It named her as the human who engraved the king of homunculus. Her body seized, breath trapped, the world narrowing to a mouth filling with death. Everyone ran. Barriers rose. Eve remained pinned in the direct line of the breath, like the universe had decided she was the target, and that was final. Michael arrived at the last possible moment, so perfectly timed it felt like fate showing off, and took the breath for her with Night Ray, forcing it sideways so the barriers could survive the spillover. Then he went straight for the chest, where the core would be. One decisive strike, an internal explosion, and Galamut's thought body shattered into ash-black nothing, leaving only a fading, hateful will behind. As if the island itself had been holding its breath, the rain stopped immediately. The sky cleared. A rainbow appeared with insultingly good timing. The competition ended exactly as everyone expected once they remembered what Michael was. He won. No one bothered counting fairly after, destroyed a demon dragon thought body, became part of the day's itinerary. They returned to the palace. It was Wednesday, Michael's scheduled overtime. Eve collapsed into bed the moment she lay down, exhausted. Michael didn't sleep. Galamut's words kept circling. Demon dragons could sense an engraved bond, could hunt the imprinter through it, and they recognized Michael as something like a natural catastrophe. He thought, briefly and dangerously, about ending the engraving to remove the risk. But when he looked at Eve asleep, messy, vulnerable, alive, he realized the truth he didn't want to admit. He didn't want to let go. So he chose the only option that didn't involve losing her. He chose to keep it and become stronger. Back in the residence, life resumed in its strange blend of domesticity and danger. Sedila spoke with Eve, reporting as usual about the happenings regarding all of Eve's endeavors. Eve praised them all, then casually tried to give Sedila another gift, renovating part of Sedila's townhouse into a proper bath, construction covered. Sedila protested, overwhelmed, and Eve, clearly enjoying this, told her to get used to being spoiled. Sedila's mind flashed back to the day she'd realized the townhouse was hers, maids calling her lady, her own disbelief, and Albin's calm confirmation that the gift came from Eve. And in the background of all of it, training, business, gifts, gardens, one truth kept tightening like thread. Eve was building power. Michael was building resolve. And both of them were still pretending their hearts weren't part of the battlefield. Eve summoned Michael, and as they settled in the parlor, it was there. She handed him a magic stone, not for battle, but for warmth and protection. Michael recognized the stone as one of the highest-grade magic stones, Aegis. Michael smiled, pleased his princess had recognized his weakness in defense, and thanked her. Michael suggested that he address her formally now that they were officially master and knight, but Eve quickly objected since she liked them just as they were now. And so she made a request of her own, for Michael to call her by her nickname, Eve, when they were alone. But Michael quickly declined as he stated how improper it was. Eve insisted as she noted how all her siblings allowed their personal knights to do the same. As Michael stared at Eve, he realized how naive she truly was. He looked away and mumbled quietly that such occurrences between an imperial and their personal knight only happened at night, in bed. This information startled Eve greatly. For in their previous lives, Michael had referred to Eve casually, although they didn't have any sort of relationship to note. And so she asked Michael about a knight taking liberties to call an imperial by name without permission. Michael scowled and grabbed his sword ready to defend his princess, but when she explained it was but a hypothetical question, he visibly calmed down. He explained that situations only happened if the knight greatly despised her or if they wanted to be her personal knight. More specifically, they wished to serve her at night. Eve flushed at the implication that Michael of the past might have wanted that kind of relationship with her. Michael watched Eve's reaction closely, and after a moment, he questioned if Eve had ended her relationship with that homunculus before appointing him as her personal knight. Eve answered yes, claiming that the homunculus had died. Michael expressed his joy and displeasure at the news. Joy that the homunculus was dead, but displeasure that he couldn't kill the knight himself. Eve and Michael traveled to the spruce forest in Ilimon, far northeast of Hedelamide, using the Imperial ultra-long-range warp portal, then transferring by magic airplane and carriage. By the time they reached the forest edge, the sun was already setting, and Michael warned against entering at night. Eve led anyway, explaining there was a hidden mid-range warp portal that would take them straight to her master's hut. Moving through the pathless woods under Eve's barrier, Michael learned the basics of her connection to the wise man. The sage had been her mother's teacher, and after the Empress died, Eve was entrusted to him for alchemy education. Eve also explained that sages barely age, then casually noted Michael seemed slow to age as well. Eve found the hidden portal, activated it, and they arrived at a 2-story log cabin in a spruce grove blooming with red flowers. The hut was unlocked for her, but the master wasn't home. A guardian serpent golem greeted Eve affectionately. Michael set down the cage-holding tail, the watch golem Eve had brought to remake. The cabin was beautiful but neglected, dusty, cluttered, weeds overgrown outside. Eve cleaned using alchemy and magic, activating purification and a cleaning golem. She also used floating magic plus memory magic to return dozens of scattered books to their exact shelves at once. Michael, startled, recognized the feat as advanced multi-coordinate calculation and told her she had rare talent for it, useful even for ranged combat magic. Eve brushed it off and shifted attention back to her work. Upstairs, Eve showed Michael her research space. The human anatomical diagrams made Michael tense. He mistook it for forbidden human alchemy. Eve clarified she was researching golem organs, specifically a replacement heart, because heart disease killed many commoners and couldn't be solved by magic or herbs alone. She planned to hand the research to the Imperial Alchemy Association later due to costs. Eve then decided to remake Tail into a guardian golem to act as a liaison between her and Michael and as a safety device. She began the alchemy ritual, reciting ingredients, and placed Tail into the brazier. She added a strand of her own hair, then asked for 1 strand of Michael's hair. After sealing and activating the brazier, she said it needed to mature overnight and played music to help it contain the self. She explained the new golem would be small, winged, palace-appropriate, and unnoticed. Michael correctly guessed, a butterfly. Eve told him to name it when it was born. That night, both had significant dreams. In Eve's dream, her masked master admitted he already knew about her regression and explained it was caused by a regression ritual powered by great alchemy and magic. Through hints, Eve deduced the sacrifice involved the Philosopher's Stone, usable by the Emperor, and the last Emperor she knew was Michaelis Agneto. In Michael's dream, the sage called him the King of Homunculus, explaining he had an innate authority over homunculi stronger than Imperial imprints once awakened. The sage also revealed this was Michael's second life, caused by someone performing a return ritual out of unbearable loss. Michael's focus immediately turned to protecting Eve. He viewed the regressor as a potential threat to her future. The sage refused to name the caster, saying Michael would learn when he recovered past life memories, and advised that awakening his king power could unlock them. Before leaving, the sage gave Michael a magic transfer scroll, a barrier-based self-defense magic designed specifically for Eve's spatial talent, and asked him to pass it to her. Morning came. Michael woke with the scroll physically in hand, confirming the dream's reality. The guardian golem had also finished forming, a dazzling amber and gold morpho-like butterfly that shed gold dust when pleased. Michael found it too flashy. It adjusted its wings so the dust stopped. He named it Amber. Looking outside, Michael saw Eve standing motionless in the weed bed in pajamas, visibly exhausted. He jumped down, draped his robe over her, and only got her attention when he called her Eve. He noticed her eyes were red and puffy. She hadn't slept. Eve avoided eye contact, spiraling over the master's implication that Michael's feelings had driven time itself to turn back, and struggled to regain composure. Amber fluttered to Eve immediately, showering gold dust. Eve latched onto the practical distraction, praising the golem and its name. Michael then delivered the urgent matter. He handed her the magic transfer scroll from the sage and advised she practice later, because working mana while mentally unstable was dangerous. Eve agreed, and the two returned to the cabin together as smoke rose from the chimney, breakfast beginning beneath a calm, fairy tale dawn that contrasted sharply with the truths both had learned overnight.